With great power must also come great responsibility. Narrator of Amazing Fantasy number 15. This is a video about Spider-Man being a bit outdated. Okay, to be honest, that's unfair. I just wanted to keep the intro I used for the last 3 essays like this. I think it's funny to open a video with some pretentious quote and then subvert it with the actual content being something kind of stupid. In this case, I'm talking about Spider-Man. He needs no introduction. In fact, he needs so little introduction that it would probably be more efficient for all of us to just ask those of you who don't know about him to look him up, rather than take up video runtime really explaining him. Honestly, a lot of his story isn't that important to this video anyway. When Spider-Man was originally conceived, he was a teenager living in New York City. Just an average kid living an average life in a big city. A big, crime-ridden city. Back in 60s New York, it was not always a great place to be. From 1965 to 69, the murder and burglary rate was up 50%. Robbery and vehicle theft over doubled, and all of this despite New York City not getting any bigger. In this environment, it made sense why a teen hero who just worked in New York City stopping street-level crime got really popular. He was somebody a young kid or teen could look up to as a role model, a person who could do something to help the community while also being buff and cool. But the thing about New York City is, it isn't the same as it was back in the 60s. Crime peaked in 1990 and has been consistently going down since then. At this point, despite the city being almost the same size as it used to be, the murder rate is a fifth of the 90s levels. Robberies down 84%, burglaries down 87%, and vehicle theft is down a whopping 93%. There's just not that much crime in New York to stop anymore. The only thing that's really been going up is non-consensual adult acts, which aren't really appropriate for an all-ages film. I honestly think that this is a big reason why there are so few street-level crimes in the movie adaptations. It'd feel really weird to have so much crime in one place when, in reality, New York is actually a fairly safe city. Plus, in the world of Marvel, which Spider-Man is a part of, there are already a bunch of superheroes that work in New York. Only the ones with red rings count in this image. I mean, even if we're just talking famous street-level superheroes, we still have Daredevil, Luke Cage, and Hawkeye. Is New York City really so crime-ridden that it individually needs 4 big street-level heroes? What about the rest of the US? I mean, San Francisco and Oakland are right next to each other and are 2 of the most criminal cities in the entire country. Who's protecting them? Nobody! So my question now is, why not just move where Spider-Man is? Let's look at the pros and cons of New York to see if we can find a better place. Some pros. It's a city with a lot of people, so a lot of folks are going to really resonate with it. It's very, very famous. I mean, probably the most famous city in the US, aside from maybe Los Angeles. It's got name recognition all over the world. It's got tons of big buildings, which Spider-Man can swing and climb on, which makes for a great setting for somebody who needs a lot of high, very vertical places to get around. New York City's full of iconic locations like the Empire State Building and Central Park, very recognizable places that make for a very cool setting for crime fighting. And it's by a body of water, which makes it great for water-based villains. A con is that New York City and state generally are very unusual on a US scale, which sounds like it'd be a good thing, but if you're trying to create a relatable everyman hero, I think it might be better to set them in a more normal location. Con number 2 is that there's just not that much crime in New York anymore, so there's like nothing to stop in the first place. And problem number 3 is that there's too many heroes in New York, which kind of ties into problem number 2 and makes it a little bit worse. So with these parameters, I've narrowed down the choices to what I think the best place is for Spider-Man to go. If he were to head out of New York, Spider-Man's best pick would be New Jersey. No, I'm joking. This isn't secretly just a giant anti-New York essay. In all seriousness, I think the best place for Spider-Man in the modern day would be Chicago. Just for surface level stuff, it is a ton of big buildings for swinging and is a very famous city. It's the 3rd biggest city in the USA by urban area, although still less than half of New York. Despite that, it is a much higher crime rate than New York, justifying a superhero and meaning that there's more crime in a smaller area. That also means it's more reasonable for him to get across the city. It has good public transit, central to every Spider-Man story, and it's on a big freshwater lake, which means that he can still have plenty of water combat. Now let's get to some of the more unique things that make Chicago stand out. First of all, Chicago is in Illinois, and according to the Business Insider, Illinois is the least unique state in the USA. Seriously, the newspaper rated it as, statistically speaking, the most average state in the country, which I think is hilarious, and also weirdly insulting? Second of all, there aren't really any superheroes in Chicago. Moon Knight was there briefly, but has since moved to New York. Spider-Man would be the only one. Third, not only does Chicago have a high crime rate, but Milwaukee, which is just north, does too. Out of all major cities in the USA, it's 25th. Fourth, Chicago has a huge number of iconic locations, just like New York. 2 giant stadiums, the Chicago Theater, its beautiful museums, the Cloud Gate, Sears Tower, 875 North Michigan, Tribune Tower, the Wrigley Building, the Civic Opera House, the Chicago Water Tower, the Roby, and so much more. I mean, just imagine Spider-Man fighting some dastardly villain down the Magnificent Mile, or chasing them down through Union Station. Chicago was the original city of architects, and it shows, with more large, iconic buildings than pretty much anywhere in the USA. And finally, fifth, I think that in the modern day, Chicago has more potential for unique societal narratives than New York. See, Chicago is in the Rust Belt, a historic area of the USA known for its industry. But since the 50s, it's been drained a lot of its opportunities due to offshoring jobs to other nations. You could create some really interesting narratives about a city suffering due to losing work, and how, because of a couple of fat cats trying to make more money, the average Chicago worker suffered. Or maybe you can include that Chicago has actually gained jobs since then, and that's meant that tons of people from outside of Chicago have moved in, leading to the draining of rural areas. You can't really get that in New York as much, because more of the money there came from the arts, which have stayed put. A 70s Spider-Man living in an area that's lost its prime industry could be really interesting. Aside from Chicago, the next best pick would probably be San Francisco and Oakland. They have more criminal activity than basically anywhere in the USA, ranking 7th and 5th respectively. It's a super dense city, actually more so than New York, and there are plenty of tall buildings to swing on. It's on the ocean for water-based combat, and is a super famous city with iconic locations like the Golden Gate Bridge, the San Francisco-Oakland Bridge, Alcatraz Island, Chinatown, Ferry Building Marketplace, and Ghirardelli Square. Plus, there are no superheroes currently operating there, so Spider-Man wouldn't feel excessive. Here's some other cities I think could be cool. Los Angeles. It's the second biggest city in the USA by urban area, with more crime than New York, plus a ton of really unique locations. Seattle. It's a large city with fairly high crime, skyscrapers, and some iconic locations in an area that isn't often represented in comics. Honolulu. There's not much crime and it's not that big, but it's a very dense city in a super unique location. Anchorage. Quite small, but one of the most criminal cities in the USA, and again, a very unique city. You could dress up Spider-Man like a woolly spider for the cold. DC. It's super historic and very iconic with a high crime rate, but it would be hard not to do a super political narrative if you're not into that. Miami. It's the 4th biggest city in the USA and has a high crime rate, but it's also very flat outside of downtown. And St. Louis, which is a bit small but has more violent crime than anywhere else in the US. If there's one city that needs Spider-Man, it's this one. And with the release of Across the Spider-Verse, they've already started experimenting with having spider folks live in different places, like 1930s New York, 3100s New York, Nueva York, and Mumbattan, which is half Mumbai, half Manhattan. So, what do you think? Could Spider-Man work in another city? Should he stay in New York, or should he move somewhere else in the US? Let me know, I want to hear your opinion on this. Alright, doing the same outro I've done for the last 3. I mean, yeah, like, again, I've said in the past video, don't take this too seriously, like, this isn't a screed against Spider-Man being in New York. I just think that, there could be some cool places, some cool other places that he could be. He doesn't have to be stuck in one location. He'd still be Spider-Man if he was in Chicago. Alright, that's it for this pretty short one. If you hated the video, please leave a dislike and a comment telling me how I can improve. If you liked the video, I can't change what you do any more than I can change Spider-Man. Thank you, goodbye, and I'll see you sometime in the future.